Whoa. Oh. Oh. Hello. Greetings. This is Charles Darwin. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you about construct validity. Now, recently, the Dow, as we call it, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, has been relatively high, up over 17,000 for the first time in history. And we tend to think that this is a good thing. Well, so what? That so what is the question of construct validity. And does what you measure actually measure what you think it does? And so the thing that we might want to know about is the health of our economy and the health of our way of life, of our society. Is the Dow Jones really a valid measure of that? Well, actually, the thing that the Dow Jones is a valid measure of is the way people feel about the economy. The corporations that are included in the Dow Jones measurement are corporations in which people invest, and if they invest more money, then that means they are more confident in the future of the economy. So it is a valid measurement of the way people feel about the economy, but it's not necessarily a measurement of how the economy actually is doing. Back during the Great Recession of 2008, the Dow Jones was up above 14,000, and then it crashed to 8,000, or maybe even lower, I don't remember. But I know that there was at least one commentator on the news, I don't remember who it was, who said, 14,000, that's crazy, that's not sustainable. What were we thinking to think that the Dow Jones could keep on at 14,000? Well, after the recovery, it's now up over 17,000. It's gone down recently. But anyway, that brings up the question of construct validity. It is a measure of how people feel, but that doesn't mean that it's a measure of the health of the economy. Perhaps an even worse one is the gross domestic product, the GDP. And that is defined, as nearly as I can understand it, not being an economist, is that it's the market value of all officially recognized goods and services in a country over time. Okay, so that would not include unofficially recognized, that is, officially unrecognized goods and services, such as marijuana, for example. Now, I'm speaking to you from Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's #1 crop is marijuana, and so that would not count as part of the GDP. But then maybe you don't want it to, because what you want to know is the things that are supposed to be happening in an economy are the things that are being measured by the GDP. So that may not be a problem. Where the problem comes in is that we use GDP per capita as a measurement of the standard of living. A higher GDP per capita means that people are living better. And that's a question of construct validity, and I would say that GDP per capita is not a very good measurement of how people are living. Let's think, for example, about cigarettes and hospitals. People buy cigarettes, which are now pretty expensive, and that contributes a lot to the GDP. People then smoke those cigarettes, they get cancer and emphysema, and they have to go to the hospital, and hospital bills contribute a lot to the GDP. The cigarettes are goods, the hospital stay is services, which contribute a lot to the GDP. Never mind whether insurance companies have to pay for it, people pay for insurance, or whether the people have to pay for it themselves. So, cigarette sales and hospital bills, but suppose you're somebody like myself or like Emma, we don't smoke. So we're not contributing, and we don't go to the hospital very much either. So we don't contribute in those ways, therefore not as much to the GDP. Also, we take a lot of walks. And we don't buy special shoes or special spandex clothing for such activities, for athletic activities. Oh, you wouldn't want to see us in spandex, I can guarantee you that. We just go in our regular clothes and our regular shoes and take walks. In doing so, we're not contributing very much to the GDP compared to what we would if we bought a lot of specialized equipment. Also, there's a lot of people who will eat out frequently. Now, Emma and I eat out sometimes, but not very often. Most of the time, we stay at home and we eat food that we've either grown ourselves or, like these tomatoes, come from the farmer's market. Now, by doing that, we've contributed a little bit to the GDP at the farmer's market, but not nearly as much as if we bought lots of packaged foods at the supermarket, or if we ate out a lot. And of course, if you eat out and eat packaged foods, there's a lot of salt and fat and sugar in those as well, which would contribute to the GDP by making us get sick and have to go to the hospital. Well, what about another alternative that might have better construct validity for telling you about people's lives? I'm referring to gross national happiness. Now, when this was first proposed by the king of Bhutan in the 1970s, it was a typically vague and typically Buddhist sort of measurement. Did it have construct validity? Well, nobody knew what it was, so of course that question could not be answered. Since that time, economists have tried to come up with some specific ways of measuring gross national happiness. There's no way of doing that that satisfies everybody. So, for instance, if you want to measure how happy people are, you measure some of the things people do when they're unhappy. And then a lower value of those things would be a higher contributor to the gross national happiness. Now, one of those would be divorce rate. If you have a high divorce rate, that might indicate that people are unhappy. But a low divorce rate, what does that tell you? It could tell you that people are happy, couples are happy, or it could tell you that women are oppressed. Which is it? Well, you can't tell just from the divorce rate itself. You have to make other kinds of measurements to determine the answer to that problem. But GDP per capita, I don't think, is a very valid way of measuring the standard of living. My grandfather was born in 1879 in Indian Territory. That is mine, the person who's speaking, not actually Charles Darwin. And he didn't buy very much. He didn't pay very many taxes because he didn't own the land that he lived on. He was a sharecropper. Most of the food that his family of 9, one of which was my mother, ate was raised there on the farm, the crops and the livestock and the milk. He did earn a little bit of income by taking the cream to market, cream ticket as it was called, but he therefore contributed a little bit. But if everybody lived like he did, then you would have a very low GNP, or rather GDP, per capita. And yet it would not be an unhappy sort of life that was reflected by that measurement. Now, as it turns out, in most countries of the world today, a low GDP per capita is in fact a measurement of economic duress, because most people in the world don't have access to farms where they can raise food for themselves, enough food. A lot of people who do have farms have to raise crops to sell to industrialized nations such as the United States. They don't really have enough land left over to adequately feed themselves. So there's a lot of suffering in the world, which is validly measured by GDP per capita. But it still doesn't work in all cases. For instance, my grandfather. So construct validity really does matter. Because look, GDP per capita, we gloat over it. GNP, we used to gloat over that. But as the author of one book said in the title of his book, you can't eat GNP. So think about construct validity and what it means, for instance, in happiness or in any other thing that you measure. And that's an important aspect of the scientific process. This is Charles Darwin. Tally ho, and amen.